This marriage was scarier than any thriller. The husband turned a fridge into a chamber of hell. For nearly 3 months, a man lived beside a refrigerator that nobody was allowed to open. He claimed the terrible smell came from spoiled food. Neighbors believed him. Friends suspected nothing. But when investigators finally cut through the ropes and pulled the doors open, they were confronted with a scene so disturbing that even seasoned officers struggled to process it. What they discovered exposed a chilling story of obsession, control, and unimaginable brutality. The story begins with what should have been an ordinary disappearance. A young mother suddenly stopped answering calls, missed visits with her daughter, and seemed to vanish without a trace. Then strange messages started appearing from her phone, claiming she had left town and started a new life. But the people who knew her best weren't convinced. And as doubts grew, investigators began uncovering clues that pointed toward a far darker reality hiding behind closed doors. A few weeks before anyone would discover the truth, the story looked very different from the outside. To neighbors and relatives, Nadia Pizarro Espinosa was simply a young mother trying to build a better future for her daughter. Raised in a modest area of Heredia, Costa Rica, Nadia grew up in a household where hard work was a necessity, not a choice. Her mother, Marilyn Espinosa, took whatever job she could find, cleaning homes, selling products, and doing manual labor to keep food on the table and provide stability for her children. Those who knew Nadia described her as kind, responsible, and deeply devoted to her family. She wasn't someone who dreamed of luxury or fame. Her goals were much simpler. She wanted security, a stable home, and opportunities for her daughter that she herself had never received. Jeremy Busousano's life followed a very different path. Born on January 21, 1999, Jeremy experienced a troubled childhood marked by instability and family problems. Authorities eventually intervened, placing him and his siblings under state care. During his teenage years, he spent time in shelters but repeatedly ran away, choosing instead to survive on the streets, in abandoned buildings, and isolated locations. Later, a businessman named Bernie Sevilla Jimenez attempted to give him a fresh start. Jeremy was welcomed into a more stable environment and even given work opportunities. For a brief moment, it appeared his life might finally be heading in a positive direction, but the change never truly took hold. He dropped out of school, struggled to maintain steady employment, and began showing signs of substance dependency. The instability that had followed him throughout his youth continued into adulthood. In 2020, during the uncertainty of the global pandemic, Nadia and Jeremy met through family connections. At first, their relationship appeared ordinary. Jeremy occasionally worked construction jobs and interacted with members of Nadia's extended family. Conversations gradually became more frequent. What started as casual interaction slowly developed into a romantic relationship. Then an accident changed everything. Jeremy was seriously injured in a motorcycle crash. Unable to fully care for himself and lacking stable housing, he accepted Nadia's offer to stay at her mother's home while he recovered. It was an act of compassion. Nadia welcomed him into her family's life at a moment when he needed support the most. Surrounded by her relatives, Jeremy spent months recovering from his injuries. For a while, everything seemed hopeful. By the end of 2021, the couple welcomed a daughter, Nashley Natasha. The birth of their child transformed their lives overnight. But it also exposed a growing problem: money. Jeremy's employment was inconsistent. Construction jobs came and went. Periods of unemployment became increasingly common, leaving the young family under constant financial pressure. Someone had to step up, and that person was Nadia. Despite having limited educational opportunities, she made a difficult decision. She entered the workforce and accepted a position at a local Mexican restaurant called Ajwa. For Nadia, it wasn't just a job, it was a way to provide for her daughter. For Jeremy, however, her growing independence created a problem. The more financially self-sufficient Nadia became, the more tension began to appear inside the relationship. What had started as a partnership slowly transformed into something much darker. The change wasn't immediate. It happened gradually. Small arguments became frequent confrontations. Disagreements became attempts at control. And before long, Nadia found herself living in an environment where almost every aspect of her life was being monitored. When the couple moved into a rented home in the Guarari area, the isolation intensified. The house itself would later become a critical location in the investigation. According to witnesses, one feature stood out more than anything else. Large black metal gates surrounded the property. Over time, those gates became more than a physical barrier. They became a symbol of Nadia's reality. Family members later described how Jeremy would lock the gates using both a key and a padlock. Sometimes he would do it before leaving the property. Other times he would do it specifically to prevent Nadia from going anywhere. Her own movements increasingly depended on his permission. One of Nadia's brothers later recalled seeing Jeremy physically block her path on multiple occasions. She wasn't simply living with him. She was being controlled by him. Inside the home, the pressure continued to build. The woman who had once welcomed Jeremy into her family's house during his recovery now viewed him very differently. At some point, Nadia began referring to him as Gusano, Spanish for worm. The nickname reflected how dramatically her perception had changed. The caring young man she thought she knew was disappearing. In his place stood someone increasingly possessive, controlling, and unpredictable. Eventually, the situation became impossible to ignore. On August 8, 2022, Nadia took a major step. She sought legal protection. Official court documents show that she requested protective measures after reporting domestic aggression. The request was approved. On paper, it looked like progress. In reality, very little changed. The couple continued living together, and the dangerous dynamic remained firmly in place. Throughout 2023, police were called to the residence multiple times. The reasons were alarming. Several incidents involved Jeremy allegedly preventing Nadia from leaving the property. In some cases, she reportedly had to contact emergency services simply to make it to work. Meanwhile, co-workers at the Ajwa restaurant were noticing disturbing signs. Nadia often arrived with injuries, bruises, scratches, marks on her arms, marks on her neck, sometimes even bite marks. She rarely wanted to discuss them. When she did, her words revealed a growing fear that extended far beyond herself. She was terrified for her daughter. According to those closest to her, Jeremy had repeatedly made threats. If she ever left him, he claimed he would find her, and what he threatened to do afterward left Nadia genuinely frightened. Still, she continued working. She continued caring for her child, and deep down, she was quietly preparing for something that would change everything, a permanent separation. By early 2024, she believed the opportunity was finally approaching. What Nadia didn't realize was that events were already moving toward a devastating conclusion. And the moment she thought she was closest to freedom was the exact moment the around her became greater than ever before. By May 2024, investigators had spent nearly 3 months untangling a web of contradictions, suspicious financial activity, and digital traces that refused to match the story Jeremy Busousano was telling. The more evidence they uncovered, the clearer it became that Nadia had never voluntarily disappeared. Bank records showed her debit and credit cards were still being used after February 20th. Yet the transactions weren't occurring in another city as the social media posts suggested. They were happening in the Heredia area, close to where Jeremy remained living. Phone data revealed something even more troubling. The movements of Nadia's accounts and devices closely mirrored Jeremy's own movements after her disappearance. Investigators concluded that someone had been using Nadia's identity to create the illusion that she was alive and willingly staying away from her family. The woman who supposedly left to start a new life had never appeared on a video call. She never sent a voice message. She never contacted her daughter. And with every passing day, investigators became more convinced that a crime had occurred. The breakthrough finally came on May 16, 2024. Authorities arrested Jeremy Busousano in Heredia. He offered no resistance as officers placed him into custody. But while one team focused on the suspect, another headed toward a location that had quietly become the center of the investigation. An old white refrigerator. Weeks earlier, neighbors and property owners had complained about the overwhelming odor coming from the appliance Jeremy had transported during his move. He repeatedly insisted it was caused by spoiled food. Investigators were about to discover the truth. On the morning of May 17th, forensic specialists arrived at the property and secured the area. The refrigerator sat on an outdoor terrace, exactly where it had been left weeks earlier. The doors were tightly secured with ropes. When those ropes were cut and the refrigerator was finally opened, investigators encountered one of the most disturbing scenes many of them would ever witness. Inside were dozens of jars, containers, and wrapped packages, but they didn't contain food. They contained human remains. Fragments of soft tissue had been carefully wrapped in aluminum foil and placed throughout the refrigerator. Larger skeletal remains were hidden beneath layers of clothing and fabric. The discovery immediately transformed the case from a disappearance investigation into a homicide investigation. Search teams expanded their efforts and soon discovered additional remains in nearby areas. Over the following days, forensic experts worked to identify the victim. The answer confirmed the fears of Nadia's family. The remains belonged to Nadia Pizarro Espinosa. The investigation then shifted toward reconstructing exactly what had happened inside the apartment behind the black metal gates. Evidence presented later in court suggested Nadia had likely been sedated before her death. Toxicology reports revealed substances consistent with deep sedation. Investigators also discovered an anatomy guide among Jeremy's belongings, containing detailed illustrations of joints, muscles, and skeletal structures. Forensic anthropologists later determined that the body had been dismembered with unusual precision. The cuts followed natural joint connections and showed evidence of anatomical knowledge. The severe wound Jeremy suffered on his hand finally made sense as well. Authorities concluded the injury was consistent with a knife slipping during the concealment process. His earlier explanations involving robbery and construction accidents did not match the physical evidence. As prosecutors assembled their case, they uncovered years of alleged abuse and control. Coworkers described seeing bruises, scratches, and injuries. Family members recounted threats and controlling behavior. Police records documented multiple interventions at the residence. Taken together, the evidence painted a devastating picture of a relationship dominated by fear, isolation, and coercive control. By February 2026, the case finally reached trial.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your kindness has touched more people than you will ever know. You made everyone's day shine. Thank you for teaching us the true meaning of strength.
Over several weeks, prosecutors presented testimony from investigators, forensic specialists, co-workers, neighbors, family members, and experts involved in the case. The courtroom heard how Nadia had repeatedly tried to regain control of her life, how she continued working despite constant pressure, how she wanted a better future for her daughter, and how she had been preparing to leave the relationship permanently. Then came the moment her family had waited years to hear. On March 20th, 2026, the court delivered its verdict. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, judges found Jeremy Busousano guilty. The court concluded that he was responsible for Nadia's death and the extensive efforts to conceal the crime afterward. He was also convicted of identity theft, financial fraud, and multiple related offenses involving the use of Nadia's personal accounts after her disappearance. In total, Jeremy was convicted on 21 separate charges. The sentence was severe, 79 years in prison, one of the most significant sentences handed down in a Costa Rican femicide case. The court also ordered financial compensation for Nadia's family due to the emotional damages caused by the crime. Conclusion: with the verdict delivered, one question had finally been answered. What happened to Jeremy Busousano? On March 20th, 2026, the court found him guilty of Nadia Pizarro Espinosa's murder, along with identity theft, financial fraud, and numerous related crimes. He was convicted on 21 charges and sentenced to 79 years in prison. As of today, Jeremy remains incarcerated, serving that sentence for Nadia's family. The ruling brought justice, but not peace. No court decision could undo the years of abuse, the months of uncertainty, or the devastating loss they endured. Her mother, Marilyn Espinosa, attended every stage of the investigation and trial, determined to see those responsible held accountable. While the verdict confirmed the truth, it could never return the daughter she lost. Perhaps the person most affected by this tragedy is Nadia's daughter. Ashley Natasha, now being raised by her grandmother, she continues to grow up surrounded by family members committed to giving her the love and security her mother always wanted for her. What began as a missing person case eventually became one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in Costa Rica's history. A story that started with suspicious messages and an unusually heavy refrigerator ended with a shocking discovery, a lengthy investigation, and a 79-year prison sentence. But beyond the horrifying details, the case serves as a warning about the dangers of coercive control, isolation, and domestic violence. Nadia spent years trying to build a better future for herself and her daughter. Tragically, she never got the chance to live that future, yet her story continues to be remembered. And perhaps that remembrance is its own form of justice. If you found this story informative, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth true crime investigations. Your support helps keep these stories alive, spreads awareness, and ensures that victims like Nadia are never forgotten.